Which means, the stackers have been very patient, and it could be that their patience is about to be rewarded. Inflation is really a multifaceted concept because it's basically the destruction of the currencies around the world. And since that's, it's everybody's money, so it hits everybody in different ways, but it affects all of us. And what's happening now is that all the money that we've been creating out of thin air and dumping into the system is finally starting to cause broad-based inflation. We've been in a very inflationary world for the past couple of decades, but the inflation has been narrowly focused on stocks, bonds, and real estate. In other words, financial asset prices have been going through the roof, but the Fed and the other central banks of the world, they don't count that as inflation. Well, a lot of other countries, not necessarily that they're experiencing higher inflation, as that it's a way bigger deal for them. For instance, a developing country like Brazil, let's say, and there are 80 other countries in the same boat. Their people spend a much bigger part of their incomes on the basics of life. In other words, food, shelter, and energy. So in the US, gas prices can go up and rents can go up, and we basically, we complain about it, we're inconvenienced by it, but we get through it. People in a developing country might not survive it because they can't afford food, or they can't afford shelter, or they can't afford to drive to work because they can't put gas in their car. And so that's a much bigger deal for them, both personally and politically. When it didn't seem all that reasonable that he would be right, he has been right. And his take is that, gold will go up as all this plays out, but it won't be because of inflation. It'll be because we lose faith in the governments of the world, and we'll start looking for a kind of money that isn't run by these idiots in charge of the Fed and Congress. And, I kind of think we end up in the same place, whether you look at gold as an inflation hedge or as a hedge against government mismanagement. But I think it's important to understand that plays a factor because of what's going on right now. We're seeing the US government behave in ways that is costing it a lot of credibility. Start with the Afghanistan withdrawal, which was really reminiscent of Vietnam, with vehicles taking off and people holding on to it and falling off and everything, and us leaving huge amounts of military hardware. And so either way, you see gold in $5,000 to $10,000 range, rather than the 2,000-ish that we're seeing right now. And silver, who knows? Silver is so volatile that if gold has a big run because of a loss of confidence in the dollar or raging inflation or whatever, you would expect silver to go up even more. For something that's relatively cheap right now, you can see some multiples of its current price. And it wouldn't surprise me at all to see $50 silver in the near term and $100 silver further out, and $200 silver in the final parabolic spasm in this whole cycle. Which means, the stackers have been very patient, and it could be that their patience is about to be rewarded. Yeah, and how does insurance works psychologically, right? Nobody wants to buy it in good times, but then as soon as it might be needed, everybody wants to buy it. But by that time, the price has changed kind of dramatically, So insurance is something that, if you're wise, you buy in the expectation or the hope of never having to use it. And if we end up in a world where we need to use gold and silver to buy groceries or whatever, that's not going to be a fun world for most people. So yes, gold and silver will allow you to continue to transact and continue to be able to get the basics of life. But beyond that, most of the rest of your life probably won't be very happy. It'll just be a messy, scary world, and you'll be glad you have gold and silver, but you don't hope that you're going to end up in a place where you need it, because that world won't be very pleasant. But, I kind of tend to think we're headed that way regardless of what we hope. We're just borrowing so much money that the consequence of that has to be such a period of chaos that for most people, it's going to feel like a kind of dark age, depression-ish. It won't be necessarily the same in all the particulars as the Great Depression, but it's liable to feel that way for a lot of people. But in the Great Depression, there were people who made a ton of money by betting against stocks and by otherwise protecting themselves. And the same will be true this time around. The people who choose the right forms of insurance are the ones who will come through this in the best shape and be best able to help their friends and families. So that's what we should be aiming for. We can't fix the world. We can't make this world or the world of 5 or 10 years from now this sunny, happy place, because that's unlikely given the mistakes we're making now. But we can protect ourselves and our families in ways that allow them to get through what's coming relatively unscathed. And, that's a pretty good goal. And if we can all end up doing that, we'll be very glad we took the time to try to understand the world now. There's always been this search for the catalyst. What's the thing that blows up first? What's the first domino to fall that knocks down the other dominoes? There are a lot of possibilities out there. I mentioned emerging market dollar-denominated debt. That could be one where they start defaulting on their, several $1 trillion worth of dollar debt. And Evergrande in China could be another thing. They chose to build their economy around real estate. Something like 72% of Chinese household assets are tied up in the real estate market versus like 30 for the US, which is already a kind of a real estate centric country. So if their real estate market starts to flake out, that's most of the country that's at risk there. And what's happening now is a lot of their big real estate companies over-leveraged themselves dramatically. They became almost Ponzi schemes. And now a big one is blowing up. The others are suffering because of that. It's very hard to borrow money right now if you're a Chinese real estate developer. And it's not clear how a lot of them survive if they can't bring in new capital because they can't service their old debts without bringing in new money. So China is very possibly the epicenter of the next collapse. We don't know for sure that it will be, but it could be. And we'll have to see how they respond to this, because it's not clear you can bail out a sector that represents 72% of household assets. That's a really big part of GDP there. And the Chinese government so far hasn't really been anxious to bail out its real estate developers, but they might have to at some point. And then the question is, what becomes of their currency if they're going to bail out that big a part of the economy with newly created yuan? I don't know. It could happen. That could be the thing that blows everything up, or it could be something completely out of left field. You can't know until really after the fact what it is that is going to be the catalyst for the next big crisis. But the important thing to understand is that we've created the conditions for the next big one to come along, so something will pop that bubble. We don't know what it is right now, but there are some really stellar candidates out there, and I suspect it'd probably be one of them, though not necessarily. Yeah, all this gloom and doom stuff will drive you crazy if you focus on it too much. So remember that this is an investment thesis. We're talking about bad things happening in the world, which will affect the financial markets in ways that can be exploited or at least protected against. So remember that it's possible by playing this correctly. You can make a lot of money for yourself and your family. Focus on that, because that's at least a hopeful idea. And then don't let the dark clouds and the potential trouble that is out there in the world make you just depress you in ways that I hear so much from a lot of people. An awful lot of people are very depressed by what's going on out there, and they're very scared, and they don't know how to deal with it. Well, let's find ways to deal with it, and let's focus on the good things that will flow from dealing with it correctly.